Voilà, j'invite chacun et chacune à reprendre place. Voilà, nous allons donc reprendre notre session, donc, qui porte toujours sur le 20e, 21e siècle. On a, avec nos deux dernières interventions et la discussion. I'm very pleased to welcome Professor Natalia Shlikhta from the National University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. She's a professor and head of the Department of History. She's a specialist of ecclesiastical history during the 20th century, especially Greek Catholic and Orthodox churches under Soviet rule. And the title of her presentation today is Individual Dimension of Reunification of Datsyshyn became an Orthodox but remained a Greek Catholic. So you have 30
Thank
minutes.
you very much.
Thank you.
Is it okay with the voice? Yeah. So good afternoon, dear colleagues. It's my real pleasure and honor to be present here, to be invited here by the organizers. And I would like to thank a lot for this tremendous conference, for this atmosphere. And so thank you. And the majority of papers delivered over these 2 days presented a macro perspective from above on the conference topic. And please let me to narrow the focus of our discussion and to present you a micro view, tell you a personal story of an ordinary priest, not such a sensational story which we've heard during our first section today. So there's just an ordinary priest, but his story, just as many dozens and hundreds of stories like him, they illustrate a complex history of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church during the 20th century. And I'll start with a brief contextual and historiographical note. Ever since Galicia became part of the Soviet Union after the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church was destined to be liquidated. And here I'm very much grateful to Professor Zaitsev, who's already raised this terminological issue. And so in my paper, I would be using the term Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, while having the term Uniat Church only when citing or referring to Soviet documents, official documents. So the liquidation of this church was conditioned by a number of reasons, from geopolitical ones to considerations of Soviet nationalities, politics, and social engineering. In March 1946, the so-called Lviv Council was held under the pressure and on the initiative and under the pressure of Soviet authorities. This council was formally led by the so-called sponsoring group for the reunion of the Greek Catholic Church with the Russian Orthodox Church, and the head of this group was Father Gavril Kostelnik, whom we already heard about. And this council predictably declared, I quote, the unanimous willingness of the faithful of this church in Galicia to liquidate the Unia, to break all the ties with the Vatican, and return to the Holy Orthodox faith of our ancestors and the Russian Orthodox faith. In 3 years, the Unia was also liquidated in Transcarpathian Ukraine, and so the Greek Catholic Church ceased its existence on the whole Soviet territory, and it was resurrected only just in the late 1980s, just before the collapse of the Soviet Union. As a result of the so-called Reunification campaign, the Russian Orthodox Church, according to official documents, acquired roughly 3,300 new parishes and also 1,300 Greek Catholic priests officially pledged their allegiance to the Patriarch of Moscow and all Rus. The focus of my paper is on the personal story of one such priest, Father Mikhail Datsyshyn, who was born in 1914 and died in 1993. He, just like other reunited priests, officially became an Orthodox, and he served in officially functioning Orthodox churches in present Lviv Oblast. He and those like him were, as we know from Soviet period documents, he and those like him were always suspected of remaining covert uniats, both by Orthodox authorities and Soviet state officials. Simultaneously, they were blamed as apostates, as Judas, by their former fellow priests who went to catacombs after 1946. Although its numerical strength and institutional potential, the West Ukrainian reunited community has rarely been in the focus of the study of the Greek Catholic Church under the Soviet rule. Scholars primarily pay attention to the activities of the Catacomb Church, and they write a dramatic story of the Church of Martyrs, and they accentuate its contribution to the preservation of the Catholic faith through the Soviet period, which enabled the eventual re-emergence of the Greek Catholic Church in independent Ukraine. The dominant historiographical thinking largely determines the scholarly view of the clandestine activities of the Catacomb Church as the only obstacle to the establishment of the Moscow's hegemony in Western Ukraine. However, scholars cannot ignore the reunited community altogether, primarily because there were so many. And because we have very little research on this community, I would say that a very simplified image of this community emerges in the majority of studies that we have. Those who officially converted to Orthodoxy are depicted either as those who compromised their faith, resigned themselves to the hostile regime, or as those who remained faithful to the Holy See, and, in the words of Bogdan Botsurkiv, I quote, employed this church, meaning the Russian Orthodox Church, as an institutional framework for continued covert uniat activities. These opposite estimates are similar in that they overlook a complex composition of the reunited community, and they present the picture so that it falls within the conventional of compromises, resistance, opposition. And while Father Datsyshyn's story, just like dozens and hundreds other personal stories like him, they show us how oversimplified such estimation is. So I will structure my paper into two parts. In the first larger part, I will trace Father Datsyshyn's personal experience of religious conversion. And two major questions I would raise here is about his identity, his self-representation, and also about his activities as a reunited priest. And in the smaller second part of the paper, I will turn my attention to the present-day collective memory and the narrative of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church regarding its Soviet period experiences. So here you can see some of the sources for the first part of my paper, because these are mainly interviews, the interviews with Father Datsyshyn himself, which was taken by then father, Boris Gudziak, whom you probably know, in 1993 within the project of the Institute of Church History in Lviv on the oral history of the Catechism Church, and also interviews with his widow, Presbyter Yaroslava Datsyshyn, whom I conducted several years ago. Also, we have many fathers' personal notes, and these personal notes, they consist of his sermons, notes on the celebration of the liturgy, notes from available church magazines. 2 church magazines were published during the Soviet period by the Orthodox Church. This Journal Moskovской Patriarchии and Pravoslavny Vestnik, which was published in Kyiv. And we have his notes on this magazine with his magazines with his personal remarks. And also we have his many notes on different aspects of parish life or his interests. For example, he was very much interested in miraculous icons and also in wooden architecture, wooden church architecture. And additionally, these are also photos, both from the private archive and those available online. And I will structure the first part of the paper into 3 major questions. And the first set of questions would be the following. How much the story of Father Datsyshyn is representative for those priests who reunited with the Russian Orthodox Church? And to which degree his understanding and understanding of his family illustrate a common narrative of reunited priests? And I will I'll spoil you from at the very beginning, because I have many more questions than definite answers to these questions, but still we have to raise them. This is the beginning of any research. And I'll start with the biography. A future priest was born on November 20th, 1914, in the village of Dobrotvir, Kamenka-Buzhsky Rayon, present Lviv Oblast, in a large peasant family. In 1935, he was admitted to the Lviv Theological Academy, where he successfully completed 4 classes. During this so-called first Soviet occupation of Galicia in 1939-1941, he worked as a German language teacher and later a head school teacher in the village of Novy Vitkiv in the Radekhiv region, present Lviv Oblast. Then he also studied in the Pedagogical Institute. In 1940, he married with Yaroslava Mrozovska from a famous priestly dynasty. When the Second World War began, he was back to the Lviv Theological Academy. He completed his studies in 1942 and was ordained on January 3, 1943 by Bishop Mikita Budka. And here you can see a very small pocket icon which was printed on the event of his ordination. He remembers. Starting from 1942, we studied how to celebrate the liturgy according to the Eastern Rite in our seminary. We partook the Eucharist standing according to the Eastern Rite. Metropolitan Sheptetsky ordered that all young priests who were to be ordained would celebrate liturgy and perform rituals according to the Eastern Rite. We will be back to Father Datsyshyn's own interpretation of this fact. At the moment, it is important to note that the graduates of the Lviv Theological Academy who were married, these are married priests, and who were ordained as priests in the Eastern Rite during 1942-1943, were more inclined to sign the so-called reunification with the Russian Orthodox Church. Father Datsyshyn was a bearer of their collective identity, as we might presume. On the other hand, a personal dimension is very important here. because he lost his hearing when he was still very young. In spring 1944, as a result of a tank shot, all windows in his church were broken, and he got the inflammation of an inner ear that caused deafness because of constant wind drafts in the church. His widow has been convinced that this trauma eventually led to his death on December 4, 1993. And also because of this deafness, as she says, he felt humiliated. It was not once that he did not hear when someone was talking. That is why we tried to minimize his communication. He tried to minimize his communication with other people. Because of this illness, he was also estranged from other priests. And the catechism priest, Father Zubretsky, was one of those with whom he maintained close contacts, according to Mrs. Datsyshyn. All these facts, as I've already said cannot give a definite answer to the question on how Father's personal story correlates with the collective fate of a reunited priests and reflects their collective narrative, but still these, I think, important things that we have to take into account when talking about him and when working with sources. And on this slide, you can see all the parishes where Father served during his life. The second question, which are the main components of Father Datsyshyn's self-perception? I would summarize them as follows. First, this Ukrainian national identity that was very much important for him. In his interviews, in his many notes, in his letters, we repeatedly find the opposition of us, meaning Ukrainians, Galicians, and them being Poles or Russians. He stresses his national identity, for instance, when describing his studies in the Polish gymnasium, where he was member of a Ukrainian cycle, the so-called Mariinska Drużyna, which studied Ukrainian history. And he was then persecuted as a Ukrainian. For instance, a certain Polish professor did not want to give him a satisfactory grade because of his Ukrainian nationalism. Second, to explain his and other fellow priests' reunification with the Russian Orthodox Church, he stresses two major points. The first one, we did this in order to save our church. The second one, the Eastern Rite made this choice without a choice. We repeatedly find this definition, choice without a choice, in all the documents when we are talking about the reunification campaign. So the Eastern Rite made this choice a bit easier, and also it allowed for a religious mission amongst Orthodox and Russian. The first point, the task of saving the church was twofold. Firstly, it presumed the institutional survival of the church and the preservation of its ecclesiastical traditions, which was especially urgent given the arrests of the hierarchy of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. And here you have a photo of Metropolitan Slepy being arrested on April 11, 1945. I quote, "At the very beginning, we refused the orthodoxy. We refused all compromises and wanted to remain with what was ours. But later on, someone suggested we should not be sincere with them," meaning Soviet and Orthodox authorities. "We should use diplomacy, and we've decided, no, we would attempt to secure all that is ours but for them, we would pretend that we've reunited with the Russian Orthodox Church. Thereby, we would save our church from the destruction. The second aspect, which was no less important and which is repeatedly stressed by Father and also by his widow during her interview, was to save the church from Russian clergy, Русские попы, as they refer to them. I quote, "We thought if we would refuse to reunite, they would come instead of us. Those former NKVDisты would come, NKVDisты KGB agents, and there was a common view in Galicia that all Russian Orthodox priests were KGB agents." Back to Eastern Rite. The Eastern Rite allowed Father Datsyshyn to conceal his true identity. In his own words, "I was serving in the Eastern Rite, but preserved a true Catholic spirit. More than that, Father Datsyshyn was convinced that the Orthodox, I quote, they tied to rituals very much. Canons and the truth of faith are much less important for them. And because of this, the rite was seen as a tool allowing to approach them, as Father argued. The Eastern Rite provided a possibility to influence Russians and Ukrainians from central and eastern regions of Ukraine and from Russia who were sent to Stray, a small Galician town where he lived, as Soviet bureaucrats and as specialists with the aim to Sovietize this small town and to work for various institutions there. In such a way, Father Datsyshyn repeats Metropolitan Sheptytsky's understanding of the Eastern Rite as a tool of approaching Ukrainian Orthodox and also of reuniting the Ukrainian National Church. Father repeatedly reminds Metropolitan Sheptytsky's ecumenical plans. In his many notes, letters, interviews, he constantly recalls well-known Metropolitan's letter of 1942 to Orthodox bishops and intelligentsia. Third point, Metropolitan Andrei Sheptytsky is the major authority for Father Datsyshyn, the major figure that allows him to justify, both for himself and for others, his own choice. Father talks extensively about his studies in Lviv Theological Academy. He remembers all his personal meetings and conversations with Metropolitan. He stresses that Metropolitan Sheptytsky was ahead of the Vatican Eastern policy by half of the century. And he presents himself as a true follower of Metropolitan's ideas and deeds. And it is very important to note here that Father Gavril Kostelnik, once again a former leader of this initiative group for reunification, is mentioned by Father only in passing. And also the same by his widow. When I interviewed her, she was talking about Father Kostelnik only when answering direct questions. Without direct questions, no Kostelnik at all in her words. Fourth, it is predictable, therefore, that the central component of his identity can be defined as follows. We were Greek Catholics. We remained Greek Catholics. We preserved all that is ours. And, which is important, we were preparing young priests who studied in official Orthodox theological seminaries, mainly in Lutsk Theological Seminary. So we were preparing these seemingly Orthodox priests as true Catholics. In this context, it was crucial for him to stress that official Orthodox bishops from amongst the reunited community, and primarily Bishop Mikhail Melnik of Drohobych and Sambir, were firm Catholics, whom authorities perceived as covert uniats and eventually killed as covert uniats. Father Datsyshyn, for instance, well remembers words of Bishop Mikhail said to a certain reunited priest who was criticizing the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. I quote, "The bird which destroys its own nest is a bad bird." The true Catholic identity of Father Datsyshyn is repeatedly affirmed when he talks about his contacts with an underground priest, Father Zubretsky, and the bishops of the Catechism Church, Vasil Velichkovsky and Volodymyr Sternyuk. His widow also remembers that Bishop Velichkovsky visited them in Stray quite often. Also, Father mentions that he secretly celebrated liturgy and performed rituals on Bishop's request because the Catechism Church did not have enough clergy to satisfy religious needs of all those who considered themselves true Catholics. He proudly stresses, I quote, "Bishop Velichkovsky asked only those to perform these services whom he considered true Catholics." And he also explains that already during their first meeting, probably in 1963, Bishop took Father Datsyshyn back into jurisdiction of the Catechism Church, and therefore Father could have clear conscience regarding his religious self. The last question here, it's on the everyday church life being a sign of change or non-change. For Father Datsyshyn, everyday church life and daily church practices have become the major argument for the preservation of true Catholic identity by the reunited community as a whole, and particularly in his own parishes. "We did not betray anyone. We did not want to betray anyone," he says. "We risked a lot because we preserved what was ours. I can prove this. I served for 31 years in my parish. From amongst 1,100 families, there were only one Orthodox family. Here we might remind Colin MacDonald's concept of material Christianity, saying that material objects such as church buildings, candles, vestments, etc., do not simply reflect an existing reality. Experiencing the physical dimension of religion helps bringing about religious norms, behaviors, and attitudes. Ego documents and visual sources allow for analyzing religious practices and everyday church life of Father Datsyshyn and his parishes in many details. We can observe the preservation of local Galician Greek Catholic traditions, of celebrating religious feasts, of performing rituals, of the preservation of church interiors and exteriors, of the activities of traditional fraternities and sisterhoods, you have thought of them here, and even delivering of sermons on strictly Catholic themes. We followed an ancient truth, Father says. You don't talk what you can't talk. This means we kept silent during the feast of St. Jozafat Kuncevych, for instance, but we commemorated him quietly. The available evidence supports Father Vlad Naumescu's thesis on the creation of a specific religious tradition in Galicia after the official reunification, where local traditions were curiously modified to adapt to the new reality and thereby were preserved through the Soviet period. I would be very brief for the second part of the paper because we started later, so I just hope I have some more few minutes. And what What about the present-day memory? In 2014, in the village of Dulibe in Stray Rayon, where father was serving for 30 years, the monument was erected to celebrate his 100th anniversary. During the Jubilee celebrations in 2014, Jubilee celebrations took place in Stray, where Father Datsyshyn lived and served as a priest through 1954-1964, and in the villages of Dulibe and Hrabivtsi, where he served since 1964. During these celebrations, the head of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, Metropolitan Sviatoslav Shevchuk, praised Father Datsyshyn as his own teacher and as a person who helped to preserve Greek Catholic faith through the Soviet period. In 2019, a special Jubilee event took place in Stray, and it was dedicated to 105th anniversary of his birth. And here's the title of this. And this book was, which is a collection of memoirs about Father Datsyshyn, called A Generous Field of Father Datsyshyn, was published, and also a documentary based on oral interviews of those who knew him was produced. The major idea of all these celebrations is summarized in the words of a certain person during the 2014 Jubilee events, saying that probably Father Datsyshyn, as a forerunner of the revival of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, should be counted amongst the saints in the future. And also there were so many arguments advanced in support of the beatification of Father Datsyshyn. I just briefly mentioned them. During the Second World War, he supported the Ukrainian nationalist underground. He celebrated liturgy for Ukrainian combatants, and he buried them. His two brothers fought in the Ukrainian insurgent army. When the Soviets came, he did not leave his own land. He remained with his flock. Regardless of his severe health problems, he dedicated all his life to his priestly service and the preservation of Greek Catholic traditions and rituals. He protected wooden masterpieces, churches in the villages of Dulibe and Hrabivtsi from the destruction. Here are these churches. He prepared young Greek Catholic priests for ordination, and he also communicated with the underground bishops. And these estimations, it is important to know, and I'm coming for approaching conclusions, they differ a lot from a common vision of him and other reunited priests from the 1990s, early 2000s. And then the vision of them, I've already said this at the very beginning, was as traitors, as apostates, as Judas of the Catholic Church. That's why Father Datsyshyn's his major points were to prove he was not a traitor. Still, on November 1, 1992, his parishioners expelled him from the village of Dulibe because he was an Orthodox. His widow remembers, "This was such a terrible blow for him. I thought he would go mad." Such a traumatic event, as well as the mere fact that many young Greek Catholic priests, after the legalization of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, renounced their mentor because he was firm Orthodox, are completely silenced in the present-day honoring of Father Datsyshyn. And this all raises a more general question, and I would finish with this, because I don't know the answer to the question. Do we observe the creation of a new collective memory of the Greek Catholic community regarding its Soviet period? Here I have a long quote by a certain journalist saying that the church survived thanks both to the church in the catacombs and those who were reunited. So my question is whether this quotation represents simply a personal interpretation of a person who wrote it, or it signals an important change in the official narrative of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. And an important question here, to what degree the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church is ready to also incorporate the heritage of the reunited community, which for decades was excluded from its official narrative. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation about this clandestine underground period of a Greek Catholic Church. We surely would have the time for more questions during the discussion. Thank you very much. So I will now give the floor to our last to the last presentations. So Professor Kerstin Jobst from the University of Vienna. She teaches in the Institut für Osteuropäische Geschichte, and among her various research interests, I note religious history and geography. And today she will speak about the afterlife of a Greek Catholic saint, the veneration of Jozafat Kuncevych in Vienna in the 20th century. Please, Professor.
Yeah, thank you very much. Before I start, I have to tell you something. Maybe you thought I'm just very fashionable, but it's because of my illness. And because of this illness, I'm sometimes lost my words. Yeah, and please, normally it's not so long, but as you know that I'm not drunken or something like that, it's just because of my illness. Yeah. Okay, thank you, but I will try my best. Today I have the pleasure to mention again somebody who played already a role in our discussion. That's the role of Jozafat Kuncevych. In the beginning, I will give you, I think it's not necessary, but everybody of you know what's about Jozafat Kuncevych, but I will try with this very, very short introduction. In 1623, a couple of years after the Union of Brest, the Uniate Archbishop Jozafat Kuncevych was murdered. Okay, thank you. Was murdered by outraged Orthodox believers in Vitebsk in today's Belarus. Today, he is firmly established and venerated by the Greek Catholic Ukrainians in Western Ukraine. That means the former Eastern Galicia, but also in parts of Poland, in Lithuania and Belarus, and in a good number of parishes all over the world, especially in Canada, in the United States, and in Brasilia as well. To this day, the Orthodox Ukrainian, Russian, and Belarusian territories, he is an inconvenient saint. This might be surprising that, and it might seem surprising that in the second half of the 19th century, the veneration of this martyr, canonized by the Pope in 1867, was initially predominantly Polish project, not a Ukrainian, and strongly rejected by the Greek Catholic Ukrainian residents in the former Rzeczpospolita, especially in Galicia. Picking up where my previous research ended a couple of years ago, I am currently preparing the project of the afterlife of this Greek Catholic man. Okay. I will write a study of the interconnections between politics and the veneration of saints by examining Jozafat as a living archive. Maybe you know that's a concept which Maria Todorova has made use of in the context of belief systems in her books, Bones of Contention, the making of Vasily Levski as a Bulgaria's national hero. This book inspired me a lot. To this end, I am planning a large-scale project for research. I will talk about the forms and functions of the veneration, and I will examine across different I will examine this across different epochs, cultures, and religions, and I will take a focus on worship, or you can say it also fetishization of gods and things as well, in both monotheistic, polytheistic, or also in popular cultures. I will give a short introduction of Jozafat's career as a saint. The Greek Catholic Archbishop of Polotsk, Vitebsk, and Mstislav, Jozafat Kuncevych, lived in the 17th century, and he was beatified in 1643 and canonized by the Pope Pius IX in 1867. He is a perfect example to get a deeper insight into the politics of religion and religious practices in Eastern and East European Europe, including the late Habsburg Empire. Seeing the historically grounded denominational fragmentation in the Ukraine, Jozafat cannot be taken as a Ukrainian national saint, although he is repeatedly referred to as such. But his cult became an expression of practiced piety and a political resource for different religious and ethnical agents. From the outside, the Jozafat cult has a clear, inclusive, trans-denominational content which should foster the cohabitation between Roman and Greek Catholics and Polish-Lithuanian in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and especially later in the Habsburg monarchy. In Austria, also in the interwar period and in the Cold War on the one hand, and this cult exclude the Orthodox, the so-called schismatics, and that means the Russians, the Soviets, and a great number of Ukrainians on the other side. It is precisely this pattern, the successful use of the martyr as an anti-Orthodox, anti-Russian, and after the revolutions of 1917, anti-Soviet symbol, and that became characteristic for the Jozafat cult in the longue durée and until today. Thus, the veneration of Jozafat can be taken in the long run as an important element in the trans-denominational competition so typical in the context of confessionalization. In the following centuries, Jozafat became not a resident saint, durable integrated in one town, in the town of Polotsk or in the Old Rus, but he was kind of a traveling martyr. And that's why I show you this card. Oh, yeah. I will start with the transfer of Jozafat relics to give you a picture of the many translations which suffered the martyr. That's a short biography, and that's his way, and I will confine myself mostly in the part of the World War I and his time in the Barbara Church in Vienna. And afterwards, in 1949, the transfer of his corpse in the Vatican City, where he's still here, and I will come to this point later. As you can see, my saint traveled a lot. But most interesting is that all translations were explained by the threat of the bones of blessed and later canonized Jozafat due to the Pravoslavnie and later to the Soviet invaders. This gave the translations not only a sacral and spiritual, but also a very, very profound political meaning. And I have to mention that he also transferred once to the Swedish, in Swedish land, but that does not play such an important role. The translations in the Russian world is much more important for the discourse I like to describe. Anyhow, at the end of the 18th century, and because of the partitions of Poland from 1772 on, the formerly so vivid veneration of blessed Jozafat calmed down for the next decades. But the discursive pattern, the necessity to rescue the bones of the venerated martyr, killed through the blows of the axis of the schismatic, received a clearly nationalistic and anti-Russian impact in the course of the 19th century. As a result, the partitions of Poland and the different religious politics of the great powers, Russia and Austria, in their annexed former territories of the Rzeczpospolita, an extreme difference in accepting Jozafat as a sacred resource became evident. In the long 19th century, in Habsburg's Kingdom of Galicia and Lodomeria, the Jozafat cult was strongly rejected by the majority of the Uniate, the Greek Catholic population. Nowadays, in this region, in today's Western Ukraine, Ukrainian nationalism and the Greek Catholic Church doubtlessly play an important role until today. The Russian cult is one, but not the most predominant component in this. The revival of the Jozafat cult and its gradually rooting in the Ruthenian territories was not due to the Ukrainian believers, but by the Habsburgs, who were at war with the Germans, who were together with the Germans against the Entente, and that means also against the Tsarist Empire. Until 1917, when the saint relics was rescued once more, it was immured in the in the Brazilian monastery in Biała Podlaska, which was not a part of the Russian Empire. In the First World War, Austro-Hungarian troops occupied parts of the former Polish kingdom, and Vienna sought for, I quote, religious and state reasons, the translatio of the relic to the Austrian capital, to the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church of St. Barbara in the Erster Wiener Gemeindebezirk, the first quarter in Vienna. While Habsburg wanted to support its role as a protector of the Catholic faith of all denominations, it intended to improve in the course of the war, seriously disturbed relation to its Ukrainian inhabitants. The reason was that the Habsburg power had reproached the Ruthenians for collaboration with the Russians during the occupation of the Eastern Galicia in 1914-1915. Altogether unjustly, by the way, because the majority of the Ruthenians remained the proverbial Tirolians of the East, die Tiroler des Ostens, even during the World War. Only the brutal and in most cases unjustified internment of the Ukrainian subjects in the Styrian camp Thalerhof, and in others, but Thalerhof is the most important one, was to mark a caesura in this regard. In this situation, and obviously unaware of Jozafat's low popularity among the Ukrainians of Galicia, even nearly 40 years after his canonization, the Austrian-Hungarians planned to put, I quote, these relics into the center of a politically highly significant Ruthenian Jasna Góra, following the example of the Polish Częstochowa. A bold plan because also in the Habsburg authorities were wrong, namely with the expectation that the Roman Catholic Polish minority in Biała, which had of course Greek Catholic roots, were amused about that step. Roman Catholics, therefore, in the Great War, the German and the Austrian-Hungarian occupation troops thought that the local population had no interest to Jozafat bones. After lengthy consultations of the Vienna Foreign Office with the Germans, brothers in arms, because Biała Podlaska belonged to the German occupation zone, Vienna received the permission to the translatio of the highly explosive remains. But the Roman Catholic, among mostly former uniates, and of the Jewish inhabitants, there were against this step. A Habsburg diplomat had no other explanation for that the Jews in the town had expected to make, I quote, profit from the development of the town as a place of pilgrimage. And this is, as you notice, is just another stereotype of the typical anti-Jewish sense of business, and they used it here. But this expectation by the Austrian side could also be equally to be a hint of the veneration or the admiration of Jozafat and his corpse by the Jews of Biała, and therefore it could be, but we have to look at it more intensely, it could be also a form of trans-religious veneration, and this kind of admiration of a corpse, of a reliquary, is not uncommon in history. What motivated the Roman Catholics in Biała that they're opposed to the transfer of the relic? Can it be regarded already as a trans-denominational and emotional connection with the local saint, or was it rather an act of resistance against the occupying power? We do not know yet. At present, a couple of aspects of the Jozafat cult and the political exploitation after the transfer of the relics to Vienna into the St. Barbara Church, where it was kept up to the recent rescue, and this time from the Soviet occupying power to the Vatican in 1949. But there are many things that are not completely investigated. That was Jozafat's space in the St. Barbara Church in the 40s. No, in the 30s. In the interwar period. I dare to make some more preliminary findings about the Viennese period of our science. In the summer of 1916, German and Austrian military officials, together with local church representatives, prepared the transfer to Jozafat's remains in 1916, 1917, and first of all, they built some medical and church commissions who said that the corpse is still in a very good shape, and this was already a sign for the requested incorruptibility of the saint. And as you know, this is a sign of holiness and also a sign for the Greek Catholics, Jozafat. In summer 1917, under the presidency of the Greek Catholic Metropolitan of Lviv, the already mentioned today Andriy Sheptytsky, who has been released from Russian captivity only a short time before, Jozafat was solemnly welcomed in the presence of many church and secular dignitaries, including Cardinal Piffel, the Archbishop of Vienna, and many people give gifts for the saved holy churchmen. And also, there was a gift also from the Empress Zita, who handed over a valuable cross, a so-called collane, to decorate the grave. And Archduke Wilhelm Wyszywany, as you know, that's his other name, known as a friend of the Ukrainians, is said to have donated a magnificent pectoral cross. And this cross was stolen out of St. Barbara in 1936. The liturgical vestments of the saint were displayed in a glass case in St. Barbara's, presumably after 1932 and before January 1936. Thanks also to the relic, the church became a center of Greek Catholic piety and politics, as it already has been in the 18th century. And many supporters join in St. Barbara to pray in front of St. Jozafat. The clerical Austro-fascists, before and after the Civil War in 1934, met in St. Barbara's as well and used Jozafat as a reliquary, as a political moment. This goes true also for the times after the so-called Anschluss in 1938, when the Nazis making use of the religious charged figure Jozafat as well, especially in his function as an anti-Orthodox, anti-Russian and anti-Soviet symbol. And the Catholic Church agreed with this politics. The next translation of our martyr took place, as I already mentioned, in 1949, in which once again the anti-Russian, but now in an anti-Soviet manner, played a role. Apparently, with the help of the Vatican, a Polish-born military priest of the United States Army and British soldiers located in Salzburg, the salvation of the holy bones from the Soviet threat, were administered once again. And this time it went to the Vatican, and since 1963, you know, he has a very prominent place in the St. Peter's Dome. That's today, I made it a couple of weeks ago. It's very in the center of St. Petersburg. And to give you again, that's just a few stations of the long rise of this traveling Saint Jozafat Kuncevych. I will come to an end. The fact that Saint Jozafat's bones are kept in the Saint Basil altar in St. Petersburg in Rome emphatically underlines the meaning of the saint as a martyr of the whole Catholic Church. In a parallel process, he has been largely nationalized in the late 20th century and became a symbol of the Basilian form of Greek Catholicism. This relevance as a trans-denominational saint today resulted from the fact, that he is a patron saint not only of the Ukrainian diaspora, but, as I already mentioned, in other parts of the world as well. So I thank you for your attention, and I'm sorry that I'm sometimes not as concentrated.
Thank you a lot, Professor, for this very interesting case study that introduces us to the political devotions, the politicization of memory, also of religious memory in particular. So we will have quite half an hour for discussion. I will call all the five professors to join me here for the discussion. We will add some chairs. Voilà, on va ouvrir la discussion. J'appelle tous ceux qui sont intervenus. Je ne sais pas si Madame Datsyshyn est encore parmi nous. Je n'ai pas l'impression. Take water. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions autour de cette personne? Ah, voilà, merci.
Well, my question is to Natalia Shlikhta. So you worked on this archive, which, as I understand, is a private archive. How many other private, because I mean, he was not the only Greek Catholic priest. It means that other people could have also their family archives. Is there some work going on scanning them, trying to reunite these pieces of information, even if the families maybe are not eager to separate from their family archives?
Okay, thank you very much for your question. Yes, this private archive kept by the family after the death of father, it's just one of many private archives of such reunited priests. And unfortunately, it is very difficult to get access to private archives because you need to have personal relations with those people. And I was lacking with Father Datsyshyn's family because, so I was born in Stray as well, and my uncle knows the family very well. So he introduced me to his widow, and so this was the beginning of our conversations, and afterwards she also gave me his personal notes, etc. But I know that the Institute of Church History in Lviv, which I've already mentioned, they do a great work on collecting documents from private archives. So I've already mentioned this great project that they do about the underground history of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church through the Soviet period. And yes, the majority of the people whom they interview within the project, because it's interview project, and the majority of archives, private collections that are collected within the projects are by catechism priests, the majority of them, but still I know some of 10 or something like that, more than 10 interviews with reunited priests, and also they gave their private not all private archives, but still some private documents to the Institute. And I think so that it's exactly the Institute of Church History in Lviv that does this great job of collecting the personal memory. Thank you for your question.
Thank you very much. That's a follow-up to the question about archives, because I was wondering about the reaction of state and Orthodox Church officials. I think imagine it would be very difficult not to see what it's really going on in the parishes. So what was the reaction of the officials, both state and the official church? And did Father Datsyshyn suffer any persecution for what he was doing in the parish? And that leads also to another part, this archival. So are there any KGB materials about him?
Thanks a lot for the question. Actually, a part of my monograph is about this issue, so I would try to be very brief. What about officials' reaction, both Soviet and Orthodox official reactions to such activities as some described in the paper? Okay, first of all, you partly answered the question. It was difficult to know what's going on. Of course, they have, from time to time, they sent their inspectors to inspect the parish. From time to time, Soviet officials, the so-called Уповноважений Ради у справах Російської Православної Церкви, that was the title of the person, he came to the church and he tried to observe what's going on. In the late 1960s, they created the so-called комісії сприяння за дотриманням законодавства про релігійні культи, which was a kind of people, of different professions, such as teachers, librarians, that such people, good Soviet people, just helping to take control over the church. So these people also were coming to church, observing, listening to what was preached, etc. And but you know, when it's small parish, and Father Datsyshyn was a small village parish, when all people know each other, and when any other outsider comes, they detect this person, and okay, I've got just some curious anecdote by Yaroslava Datsyshyn, who says, okay, the person came to the church and detected that Father Datsyshyn said something wrong about some Catholic saint, and afterwards Father Datsyshyn was taken to the militia and was asked what he was saying, and the answer was, okay, you see, here's the written text of what I was saying. I don't know what that person had. My words are here, and all my parish will confirm that I said this. No Catholic saints. So you're right, it's difficult to detect. And actually, Father Datsyshyn was taken to these officials from time to time, and he was trusted by the Orthodox bishop, who was always a member of the reunited community himself. And as far as I know, there are no KGB files about him, because he was a very loyal person. I mean, nothing like something for which he could be persecuted, and that's why all this story about himself and underground bishops, it came out only after 1991. So if I answered your question, thank you.
Thank you. I was fascinated by the circulation of the saint and of the artifacts of the saint, and this could be a very general issue. So I thought that, for instance, in the same time when Jozef goes from Vienne to Rome, the relics of St. Mark go from Venice turn back from Venice to Alexandria. And after the civil war in Lebanon, the supposed chief of St. Maroon went back from Italy to Lebanon. On the Orthodox side, a Syrian guy worked in Romania in the 70s and bought there a small copy of the icon of the Virgin of Kazan, and came back to Damascus with this icon, and this icon began to make miracles. And of course, it was also a political issue with the Baath regime in Syria, with the strong link to communist Romania and to Soviet Union. And I heard also that today in Romania, the monks introduce Russian saints into Romania. And turning back to the early modern period, which I know better, there is also a spiritual geography. And all the bishops who make the obedience to Rome ask for relics. They are always asking Rome to send relics to Syria, to Lebanon, or to Egypt.
Yeah, thank you very much. I know it was a quite common practice in former times, in the Middle Ages, to the transfer of relics. It was normal, but I wondered that in the 20th century, after enormous disastrous war and committed by Austrians, and it was an international of helpers to perform this translatio. Yeah, it's this international of believers, of rescuers, was quite impressive for me, and I still want to have a deeper insight in this thing. So I'm very glad that I had the possibility to present it here for the first time.
Maybe I have a controversial question, but we speak all the time about influence of church on national ideas, national movement, and I ask myself if there are attempts to use Greek Catholic Church for different ideas, for internationalization, maybe not from left, but for more democratic tendencies. It's just national all the time. Or for example, this migration to Prague, Masaryk.
I think it's still, or more than ever, a good tool to conduct such things. And we had the hope after the end of the Soviet Union that this typical, that there will be an international of freedom, and I think this hope vanished, and the national master narrative still played an immense role. And I don't think that in the next years, and after the circumstances we all know what I mean today, there will be no change, in my opinion. And such maybe very, very comic roles like the veneration of saints and the transfer is very, had immense relevance still for many people. And I think it's a way to make politics. Now you have the possibility.
I think in the time of the 20s, 30s, it's more, in the Czech context, it's more like pan-Slavistic and not national. And that they use it like a way to the east. That the Greek Catholics is the halfway to the east.
Just to add something to what you said now, maybe a Catholic use of pan-Slavism, you know? Not pan-Slavistic view, but a Catholic use of pan-Slavic, how to say that, reappropriation in Moravia, of a long story, or long Syro-Methodian story, but it is not pure pan-Slavism, it is Catholic use of pan-Slavism.
And if I may just very briefly, I don't know the answer whether it's possible for use for, or why it's not used for any other course, but I just tell why for these Greek Catholic priests, I was talking about national identity was that much important. It was partly, yes, because of the politics, because of the attitude of Soviet authorities. The idea behind the reunification was assimilation, was religious assimilation, Greek Catholic to Orthodox, and was national assimilation of Ukrainians to Russians and to Soviets. Therefore, for these people, this reaffirmation that we are remaining the same meant both religious identity and national identity. So, and this very interesting that when we go to the narrative of the underground church, national issue is much less important for them. For them, the major one is a religious self. So their major statement, we preserve our Catholic faith. So that's the point, and national identity is just the second after that. But for these people who were accused of betraying their religious self, for them, their national reaffirmation becomes the point of proving that they remain the self. Thank you for your question.
You haven't said anything about Orthodox Church, because it was not only Russian Orthodox Church or Moscow Patriarchate, it was also Autocephalous Church. So what was their attitude to this other Ukrainian identity, which was Orthodox and which was not Russian Orthodox Church? If you have... If you have sources.
Yes, you know, when we are talking about the period, I was talking about this post-Second World War period. The only one church was Russian Orthodox Church, because the Ukrainian Autocephalous churches, there were two from central Ukraine and from Rzeczpospolita, and the church from that was revived during the Second World War. They were all suppressed. So we are talking during the period. We are just talking about one Russian Orthodox Church.
But Alexander, I think that he had something about it is your period, Alexander.
What's your question?
Autocephalous Orthodox Church. What was their attitude? They were enemies, or they are also Ukrainians? You have to integrate also Orthodox somehow.
Context of a relationship with nationalists. Orthodox Church was not a rival for nationalists in Galicia, because there was no Orthodox political movement. We have a Catholic political camp which was very active, which actively discussed a different question with nationalists, which actively opposed the creation of nationalist religion. And we have no political movement of Orthodox character. There was, for example, Volhynian-Ukrainian Union in Volhynia after the protection of Voyevoda Jozefsky. But this was not a religious movement of the religious character. So the nationalists have no polemics with Orthodox, but have strong and sharp polemic and clashes with Greek Catholic priests and the activists of Ukrainian Catholic movement. Therefore, I talk only about this aspect.
Add just a word to your question, because when we are back to interwar period, you know, there were these plans, ecumenical plans, the plan, he told this, з'єднання українських церков by Metropolitan Sheptytsky. So it was him who was approaching Orthodox, and I've mentioned his letter, this famous letter, and also in many of his sermons, he was saying, okay, we have certain prejudices against Orthodox, but the same they have against us. So let's forget our mutual prejudices and approach each other. So this was his plan. So, but what about the Orthodox answer? I mean, Ukraine, for instance, Policarp Sikorsky or people like him. Actually, I don't know, and I can't answer your question. Thank you.
And I would add that the Ukrainian organization of Ukrainian nationalists considered the Orthodox Church in Ukraine subordinate to Moscow Patriarchate as detached from Ukrainian Orthodox Cossack tradition, but welcomed the idea of creating the Ukrainian Autocephalous Orthodox Church independent of foreign patriarchates. And by the way, the constitution drafted by one of the most important OUN's ideologists, Mykola Stiborsky, in 1939, I found the quotation, stated, "The Ukrainian Orthodox Autocephalous Church with the Patriarch in Kyiv and the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church with the Metropolitan in Lviv are recognized as a national church in the state. In the future, the nationalists hoped to create a united Ukrainian national church." So was it attitude to the problem of unification of the churches in Ukraine.
First of all, thank you very much for this very fascinating panel. I have a question out of curiosity, if I may. It's not precisely the topic of this conference, but if you might have seen that in your research, do you think that you could do a link between the cases that you explained and, for example, the so-called independent state of Croatia if you take a Roman Catholic Church at the beginning of the 1940s with cases like Bishop Stepinac and so on, and the whole idea of the combination between Roman Catholic Church and fascism and so on. Do you think that to all of you maybe, that there might be a connection between both topics, let's say? Thank you.
There is connection, but not in a religious form, because it's connection. There is connection in two aspects. The first aspect is contacts that organization of Ukrainian nationalism had with Ustasha movement in Croatia. There were contacts, and even Croatian Ustasha and members of Ukrainian organization of Ukrainian nationalists trained in common camps created by Italian fascists, and they trained together. But after the assassination of King Alexander and Minister Louis Barthou, these camps were closed, and Ustasha and Ukrainian nationalists were interned in different places, for example, in Sicilia, in Tortorici, and so on. And the other aspect is typological similarity between the OUN and Ustasha. I even wrote several articles in which I tried to introduce the term Ustashism as a common term for denoting the integral nationalist movement, which was similar to fascist, but differed from fascist because it was the movement of stateless people. It was a common feature of Ustasha movement before the creation of independent Croatian state in 1941, and OUN, which never managed to create its independent state, because in 1941 Hitler and Mussolini allowed to create independent state of Croatia. And in Ukrainian case, Hitler suppressed the independent state already proclaimed in Lviv on 30th of June in 1941. So we have a different connection between Croatian nationalist movement and Ukrainian nationalist movement. Thank you for your question.
Thank you very much. I don't know. Est-ce qu'il y a encore des questions? Sinon, il est à peu près l'heure des conclusions. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, all of you. Et je laisse donc la place aux conclusions de professeur Ducreux.
Oui, donc ma tâche n'est pas des plus simples. I will speak in French, but if you want, we can translate some. If you don't understand, I can translate it after. But parce que je dois conclure un colloque extrêmement riche, aussi riche d'ailleurs que le sujet dont il s'occupait. Et je ne suis pas moi-même une spécialiste de l'uniatisme. Simplement, ayant un grand projet, travaillant depuis des années sur la monarchie des Habsbourg, à l'époque moderne, mais en commençant par Prague, ensuite allant à Vienne, Budapest, Bratislava, puis Rome, et puis la Pologne aussi, j'ai rencontré évidemment beaucoup de phénomènes d'églises unies ou de tentatives d'union que l'on ne peut pas comprendre immédiatement si on ne prend pas en considération un certain nombre d'angles, de vues, et c'est ceci sur lequel je voudrais insister, parce que je ne peux pas naturellement reprendre en 15 minutes, peut-être même en 10 minutes, toute la richesse et tous les détails qui ont été émis par tous les contributeurs de ce colloque. Donc je m'excuse auprès de ceux qui ont fait des communications détaillées sur un sujet, sur une personnalité, par exemple, très précise, parce que je ne peux pas les retenir ici, mais ils comptent énormément pour ce que je vais dire. D'abord, ce qui est, à mon avis, caractéristique de la naissance et de la... C'est un peu là-dessus que je vais me concentrer. Qu'est-ce qui est caractéristique de l'existence et de la naissance de groupes, de projets, d'églises ou de communautés uniates? D'abord, la pluralité des projets, la pluralité des contextes et la pluralité des églises. Ensuite, la paradoxalité, je ne sais pas si le terme existe en français, mais peut-être paradoxalité, la paradoxalité des réalisations, qui ne peut être perçue que sur une longue durée. Et c'est un des avantages de ce colloque qu'il ait pris les questions d'une façon chronologique, tout en donnant des sous-titres à chaque session qui permettent d'avancer vers des concepts de plus en plus, qui n'existaient pas au début, mais qui sont de plus en plus caractéristiques au moment où les communications qui nous ont été présentées se sont situées. Donc, je voudrais aussi, je parle de la paradoxalité des réalisations, et là, évidemment, il y a aussi des tensions, des clivages et des divisions internes. Des luttes entre les orthodoxes et les uniates, et des luttes finalement entre les uniates eux-mêmes. Et Benjamin Landais nous a donné une très bonne illustration de cette situation paradoxale, de cette paradoxalité d'ailleurs, en montrant combien toutes les tentatives d'union entreprises par l'administration autrichienne dans le Banat avaient échoué, mais pourquoi elles ont pu réussir au XIXe siècle grâce à des orthodoxes roumains, à des uniates roumains, mais au XIXe siècle, dans un autre contexte, et finalement dans un contexte post-1848 et puis celui après du compromis austro-hongrois. Mais n'allons pas jusque-là. Donc ça, c'était absolument fascinant de voir comment les Roumains, finalement, du Banat, ont trouvé avantage à se réunir au XIXe siècle contre les Serbes, contre les orthodoxes serbes. Bon, je simplifie, mais c'est une de ces paradoxalités, comme il y en a beaucoup d'autres. Ce qui est aussi évidemment frappant, c'est que toutes ces églises, sauf le cas dont je viens de vous parler, ça veut dire que tout est possible, mais sur une longue durée, au départ, sont des créations politiques, politico-ecclésiastiques, mais politiques. Je pense que je ne suis pas une spécialiste de l'Union de Brest, mais il s'agit tout de même aussi de donner à la noblesse du Grand-Duché de Lituanie les mêmes droits politiques, les mêmes droits d'accéder aux offices de la couronne que les nobles polonais. Et pour ça, il faut être réunis à l'Église catholique. Donc, ça ne suffit pas, mais c'est quand même une entreprise, ça devient une entreprise de l'Église catholique, presque immédiatement, mais c'est aussi une question politique interne à la Pologne, à la réunion du Grand-Duché de Lituanie et de la Pologne, à l'union personnelle, à l'union réelle, qui n'est plus une union personnelle. Bon. Donc, mais on ne peut pas appliquer ce raisonnement-là à d'autres contextes. Les autres contextes sont différents. Donc, tout ceci induit, et je crois que c'était aussi la grande richesse de ce colloque, que tout ceci est en permanence en tension et en évolution. Et en passant donc à cette question des tensions, je voudrais lister une série de questions. J'ai parlé de la pluralité, des pluralités, de la paradoxalité. Et maintenant, je voudrais lister une série de questions. Et la première étant la question des langues. Ça n'est pas une chose tellement simple non plus, parce que vous avez les langues utilisées, autorisées pour le culte, donc les langues des églises, ou des langues autorisées par Rome, dans ce cas précis, puisqu'il s'agit d'églises en union avec Rome, qui sont grosso modo le grec, la liturgie en grec, ou la liturgie slavone, caractère liturgique, en caractère cyrillique, mais sans compter qu'il y a aussi des caractères glagolitiques, mais ça, c'est autre chose. On va laisser ça de côté, parce que c'est plutôt pour les catholiques en Croatie. Donc, ou sur les franges, parce que la Croatie elle-même, c'est encore une autre question. Donc, la question des langues, autorisée par Rome, donc officielle, et puis la question des langues dans lesquelles prient les fidèles, parce que, et là on rejoint une autre question, qui est celle une sous-question, qui est celle de l'instruction du clergé, de l'existence même dans certaines régions d'un clergé uniate, de la possibilité d'existence de ce clergé. Et là, je ne pense pas à la Pologne-Lituanie, mais bien sûr, il y aurait l'Empire russe et ce que nous venons d'entendre au XIXe siècle et puis sous l'Union soviétique, mais sur les franges de la monarchie des Habsbourg, j'appelle ça des franges. La Hongrie n'est pas une frange, mais elle a été. Là, c'est la seconde question que je voulais aborder, qui est celle de la question des frontières. Mais là, je suis encore dans la question des langues. La Hongrie est une frontière. La Hongrie divisée jusqu'à la reconquête, ou disons la récupération par les Habsbourg des territoires occupés par les Ottomans. Les Ottomans n'appellent pas ça une occupation, parce que la Hongrie ottomane a eu une existence, bien sûr. Comment peut même exister un clergé uniate? C'est une question vraiment très importante. Et nous avons des groupes, Benjamin en a bien parlé hier, mais des groupes très, très, très différents, dont l'histoire est assez différente et peut-être pas encore suffisamment creusée, documentée, parce qu'elle est documentée de façon compartimentée. Elle est documentée localement, sur des territoires locaux, dans des communautés ou des églises locales, mais nous manquons de transversalité. Du moins, c'est mon point de vue. Peut-être que Monseigneur Chez a un autre point de vue, parce qu'il les connaît tous, il les connaît toutes, et moi, évidemment, non. Moi, je tâtonne pour reconstituer une évolution même territoriale qui, dans les Balkans et dans les frontières sud de la monarchie des Habsbourg, est particulièrement difficile à reconstituer, en particulier sur toute la frontière dalmato-croato-slavone. Voilà. Bon, encore plus que dans le Banat. Bon. Donc, toutes ces dévotions sont en langue vernaculaire. Elles ne peuvent pas être autrement, même si. Et j'ai récemment lu un article passionnant d'ailleurs de Tamás Vecső, qui est un prêtre uniate de l'Église uniate hongroise, qui a trois éparchies aujourd'hui, et qui est sur la frontière avec la Roumanie et la Serbie, donc qui au départ était à Debrecen, donc c'est vraiment une zone frontière qui n'appartenait pas à la Transylvanie, mais à la Hongrie occupée par les Ottomans. Et qui était beaucoup sous le contrôle quand même des princes de Transylvanie, qui avaient aussi des possessions privées
je ne donne pas le nom qu'on utilise en latin, au nord-est de la Hongrie. Et voilà. Et donc, en fait, Debrecen est la Mecque des calvinistes, la Mecque des calvinistes. Et alors, théoriquement, et excusez-moi de faire cet excursus, les uniates de cette région seraient des protestants qui n'auraient pas voulu devenir catholiques, donc des protestants hongrois, et qui seraient passés à l'uniatisme. Il y a quand même un problème, c'est que le premier livre ou un premier Notre Père en caractère cyrillique en hongrois paraît en 1600. Alors je veux bien, mais ce n'est pas le moment où on va essayer de convertir les protestants de cette région. Donc je pense que là, il y aurait quand même encore des choses à voir. Mais ce qui est très intéressant, c'est qu'ils n'avaient pas le droit d'utiliser comme langue liturgique le hongrois. Donc, mais les prières vernaculaires étaient en roumain, dans les dialectes, à mon avis, en serbe, en croate peut-être, pas tellement en serbe, en croate, en hongrois et dans d'autres langues, mais sans qu'il y ait de culte permis dans cette langue. Et pour faire très vite, c'est le gouvernement hongrois, après 1867, qui crée les ouvrages liturgiques en hongrois pour l'Église uniate de ces trois régions, contre l'avis des évêques et contre Rome. Ensuite, Rome accepte que cette Église existe et leur donne l'usage d'une langue liturgique qui est le grec, en 1912. Et aujourd'hui, naturellement, et comme toujours, c'est le hongrois, sans doute d'après les livres traduits entre 1867 et 1890 ou 1900, mais c'est toléré, ça n'est pas officiellement permis par Rome, à moins que Monseigneur Croce me contredise. C'est juste pour vous expliquer un cas qui n'a pas été abordé, mais cette diversité linguistique et l'écart entre la langue liturgique officielle et puis la façon dont les gens prient est extrêmement importante. Et là, on revient à un facteur qui a été, pour toute la Pologne-Lituanie, déterminant, mais qui serait peut-être aussi dans l'ancienne monarchie des Habsbourg, c'est l'instruction du clergé et la différence entre le haut clergé et le bas clergé. Je ne vais pas m'appesantir là-dessus, je pense qu'on en a beaucoup parlé, mais c'est évidemment très, très important. Ensuite, il y a la question des frontières. Alors, il y a les frontières territoriales, j'en viens d'en évoquer une, mais on les retrouve partout. Et je pense que l'Ukraine et la Biélorussie actuelles sont quasiment traversées par cette question, sans parler de la Pologne, bien sûr, avec ces différents changements, ces différents partages, puis ces différents changements frontaliers. Mais il y a aussi la question des frontières. Alors là, je me situe plutôt au niveau des laïcs et des simples prêtres, entre l'orthodoxie et l'uniatisme. Et ça, on a l'impression que, au moins pendant toute la période moderne, c'est quelque chose qui n'est pas tranché. Le rite oriental, c'est quoi? Alors bien sûr, les orthodoxes de Vitebsk ont assassiné Jozafat Kuncevych. Ils l'ont assassiné, bien sûr. Donc ils identifiaient quelqu'un d'autre par rapport à leur propre hiérarchie. Mais Laurent Tatarenko a suffisamment expliqué cette discordance dans sa thèse qui est parue sous un autre titre, mais ce titre était magnifique. Bon. Donc là, il y a aussi probablement au niveau de la pratique des fidèles quelque chose qui n'est pas forcément une frontière, mais une porosité. Bon, c'est des questions que je pose. Voilà. Donc, ensuite, la question de la création des églises elles-mêmes, qui peut-être a été plus sous-entendue que explicitée dans ce colloque, dont ce n'était pas le sujet. Mais ce n'est pas toujours des églises, c'est des petits groupes, c'est des communautés. Comment les officialiser? Quoi en faire? Des éparchies, des métropoles, etc., etc. Ensuite, la question des administrations, et des administrations généralement étatiques, c'est ce qui est, et ecclésiastiques en même temps. Je pense qu'en Pologne, on peut considérer que la haute hiérarchie catholique à l'époque moderne est aussi une hiérarchie politique, parce que la plupart du temps, les évêques et archevêques ont des fonctions, des offices du royaume, et là aussi, il y a un écart. Comment dire, la question de l'administration séculière, politique, et la question de l'administration ecclésiastique, c'est quelque chose aussi qui est à démultiplier selon les contextes. Puis quand on avance dans le temps, on a la question de la définition, alors je ne veux pas utiliser le terme ethnie, mais je vais l'utiliser, par ethnie et par nation, qui n'est pas du tout adéquate au départ. Au départ, c'est plutôt les statuts et la confession. Les statuts et la confession. Je ne sais pas si on peut être d'accord pour l'Hetmana cosaque, mais moi je pense que oui, parce qu'il s'agit quand même de défendre et sa confession et ses statuts et ses privilèges. Quand je parle des années 1640, 1655 et tout le XVIIe siècle, et l'arrivée de Moscou qui coupe la future Ukraine en deux. Bon, progressivement, on voit quand même arriver, je dirais quand même dans la deuxième moitié du XIXe siècle, des identifications avec une nation ou une langue et une église. Bon, mais là aussi, c'est à décliner de façon très prudente et très différente en fonction des différents contextes. Et certainement, ce n'est pas le cas en Hongrie, par exemple. Mes uniates hongrois, c'est une curiosité, mais c'est quand même quelque chose de très intéressant. Tout cela, j'ai déjà parlé de l'instruction, mais il faudrait y revenir parce que c'est aussi la question de la liturgie effective et des rites effectifs. Et voilà. Donc, je pense que j'ai oublié quelque chose. Oui, parce que maintenant, au XXe siècle et avec la Première Guerre mondiale et les guerres d'indépendance, qu'on peut les appeler comme ça, Ukraine, Pologne, la révolution russe et la création de l'Union soviétique, puis celle d'États nationaux, et en fait qui sont multinationaux, la Yougoslavie, la Tchécoslovaquie, la Hongrie, qui quand même restait un État multinational, même pas du tout dans les mêmes proportions qu'auparavant, mais tout de même, et la Pologne, qui était un État multinational, sur les ruines de l'Empire des Habsbourg et partiellement de l'Empire russe. Alors, c'est encore d'autres changements, d'autres tensions intérieures et internationales, autant de situations hautement différenciées, qu'il n'est pas question que je redétaille ici, qui ont été très bien abordées dans tout ce colloque, mais pas toutes, parce qu'elles n'ont pas pu être toutes abordées. Donc, je terminerai peut-être en disant que c'est à la fois une réunion et un émiettement qui marquent l'histoire des communautés ou des églises uniates, et que moi, je sors de ce colloque extrêmement enrichi, y compris pour mes propres travaux. Merci aux organisateurs.
Bien, je me permettrai simplement de dire peut-être quelques mots de fin pour ce colloque. Vous remercier tous, remercier tous les intervenants. Donc nous finissons cette rencontre sous le regard de Clément VIII, de Cyril Terlet, qui est Patipoch. Et pourquoi je mentionne cet aspect, c'est parce que je pense que le colloque a montré aussi qu'il est important de travailler non seulement sur les églises comme les institutions, de travailler sur les contextes politiques, mais de travailler sur les acteurs finalement et de faire cette histoire justement des communautés, enfin, donc des fidèles qui ont été impliqués dans ces différentes constructions, certes religieuses, mais aussi politiques, sociales, etc. Et c'est peut-être là aussi l'une des voies vers lesquelles il faudrait aujourd'hui essayer d'orienter ces différents travaux sur l'uniatisme, évidemment dans l'espace slave, mais plus généralement. Donc, en remerciant tous les intervenants, tous les modérateurs, enfin Marie-Elisabeth Ducreux qui s'est chargée des conclusions, qui n'est pas une tâche facile, je le sais bien. Donc je tiens vraiment, en mon nom propre et celui de Francine Dominique Lechenam, à vous dire un grand merci pour cette rencontre qui, je pense, a été en tout cas réussie, on l'espère, mais a été très, très enrichissante pour chacun de nous. Et donc voilà, je terminerai simplement sur quelques précisions pratiques pour les intervenants, les modérateurs des séances et les présidents de séances, puisque nous avons prévu de nous retrouver au restaurant à 19h. Donc pour ceux qui le souhaitent, vous pouvez soit y aller directement à 19h, donc je vous donnerai l'adresse, je vous demanderai de nous attendre un petit peu avant de partir, soit simplement on peut faire une petite balade entre le colloque et le restaurant, donc en attendant de nous retrouver là-bas tous ensemble, et d'y aller tous ensemble à 19h. Donc, I switch to English just to explain this. Of course, I would like to thank all of you for your very interesting presentation, for your compliments in this encounter, which I hope was interesting for each one of you. And I suggest that we so we have two possibilities, in fact, because we have to go to the restaurant at 19 o'clock. It's a restaurant near your hotel. So we have two options, or for those of you who want to go to the hotel first, we can, for example, meet you at the hotel and 18:45, so and go together to the restaurant. And for those who have a little time now, so we have to do a little walk in this this area, which is a pleasant one in Paris, and to go together to the restaurant. So once again, thank you very much for all of you, and thank you. Thank also of course the institution Fondation Singer-Polignac, who gathered also in a way this meeting, and who welcomed us very friendly and with high efficiency, let's say. So thank you very much. Merci évidemment à la Fondation Singer-Polignac également pour nous avoir accueillis.